Has Ferrari just discovered a hidden bug that could be sabotaging Lewis Hamilton's car, and that not even Charles Leclerc can understand? Because what happened in the Japanese GP was not a simple loss of performance. It was something much more serious. A Ferrari that, being at maximum power, simply stopped pushing. How is it possible that two identical cars behave completely differently in the same race, and that one of them loses power without explanation while the other does not? And most importantly, has Ferrari uncovered a much bigger problem that could change their entire season? The 2026 Japanese Grand Prix not only delivered an intense race, it revealed an internal crack in Ferrari that no one expected to see so early in the season. It all begins in a moment that, live, seemed completely normal. Lewis Hamilton riding in third position after the restart of the race, in a solid strategic situation with enough pace to fight for the podium. But what came next was a progressive, silent, and above all, incomprehensible collapse from the outside. Because lap after lap, the number one Ferrari began to lose something that in Formula One is everything: the ability to push on a straight line. It wasn't a visible error. It wasn't going off track. It wasn't an obvious tire problem. It was something much stranger. Hamilton pressed the pedal, but the car did not respond. And the most alarming thing, the rivals began to overtake him without real resistance, as if they had an invisible advantage impossible to explain under normal conditions. What at the time seemed like a simple loss of rhythm quickly became a clear anomaly when compared to the other side of the garage. Charles Leclerc, with the same SF26, was not suffering from that level of deficit. And this is where the real internal conflict within Ferrari begins, because for the first time they were faced with a situation where two identical cars offered completely different behaviors in a race without an obvious cause at first glance. Hamilton made it clear after getting out of the car. He was pushing as hard as he could, but there was simply no power available. This statement not only set off alarm bells, but forced the team to review each piece of data with an extreme level of depth. And what they found was even more disturbing than expected. During the 53 laps of the race, especially in the second stint, the Britain's car showed a constant deficit in top speed. It was not punctual. It was not circumstantial. It was sustained. This rules out basic errors and points directly to a structural problem in how the car was managing its energy. In Formula One of 2026, where the hybrid system has a determining weight in total performance, any failure in this balance not only makes you slower, it leaves you completely exposed. But what is really critical is that this problem did not arise in the race. Ferrari detected that the origin goes back to qualifying, to a very specific moment where Hamilton suffered oversteer. An apparently minor moment, but it triggered a failure in the electronic system that manages the deployment of energy. From there, the car entered a kind of abnormal state where power delivery was no longer optimal, especially on straight lines, just where it is needed most. And this is where the problem stops being specific and becomes a real threat for Ferrari. Because we are not talking about a broken part or a traditional mechanical failure. We are talking about a system that depends on algorithms, advanced electronic management, and that can be altered by events that, under normal conditions, should not have such serious consequences. This discovery completely changes the reading of what happened in Japan. Hamilton did not lose positions due to a lack of pure pace, nor due to strategic errors, nor even due to degradation. He lost them because his car stopped delivering power correctly at key moments. And that, in such an even grid, is the difference between fighting for the podium or falling out of the top 5 with no possibility of defense. Meanwhile, on the other side of the garage, Leclerc watched the situation in disbelief. Because if both cars are the same, if both start from the same base, then the question is inevitable. What really guarantees performance in this new era of Formula One? Ferrari left Suzuka with more questions than answers, but with a disturbing certainty. The limit is no longer just in aerodynamics or mechanics, but in the complexity of systems that, if they fail, can sink an entire race without warning. And what happened with Hamilton is not an isolated case without importance. It is a direct warning of what could be repeated at any time. As Ferrari delves deeper into the analysis of what happened at Suzuka, the situation is no longer just an isolated incident and becomes a structural threat that completely changes the understanding of the performance of the SF26. Because what initially seemed like a specific loss of power in Hamilton's car begins to reveal a much more complex pattern, where the technology that should be its greatest strength becomes, ironically, its greatest weakness. The team identified that the problem was not only the initial glitch in qualifying, but the system's inability to recover during real race conditions. In other words, the car didn't just fail, it was trapped in a state of degraded performance from which it could never emerge. This is key because, in current Formula One, hybrid systems do not function as independent elements, but rather as an interconnected network where each electronic decision directly affects the overall behavior of the car. Here comes into play one of the most delicate points that Ferrari revealed internally. Energy management was not correctly synchronizing recovery and power deployment. This meant that not only did Hamilton have less power available on the straight, but the car was also mismanaging power throughout the lap, compromising every phase of performance. It wasn't just that the car was slow, it was inefficient at all times. And this explains something that was disconcerting on the track, the progressive fall. Because Hamilton did not lose all the positions at once, but was overtaken little by little, unable to respond as if the car were electronically limited. This progressive degradation is the clearest sign that the problem was not mechanical, but systemic. An invisible failure that does not generate obvious alarms, but constantly destroys performance. The most worrying thing for Ferrari is not only what happened, but what it implies. Because when analyzing the comparative data with Leclerc's car, the team discovered that there is no structural difference between both cars. There are no different pieces. There are no radically opposite configurations. The only significant variable is the behavior of the energy system after that initial event. And that opens up a completely new scenario. Performance no longer depends solely on the car, but on how its systems interpret and react to what happens on the track. This leaves Leclerc in an uncomfortable position, almost one of disbelief, because until now in Formula One, differences between teammates could be explained by driving style, adjustments, or strategy. But what is proposed here is much more unstable. The same car can offer two completely different realities depending on apparently minor events. And that breaks one of the fundamental principles of the competition. Ferrari, aware of the severity, began to question not only the incident in Japan, but the complete robustness of its electronic architecture. Because if a simple oversteer can alter the behavior of the system to the point of compromising an entire race, then the margin of error is reduced to dangerous levels. It is no longer just about going to the limit, but about avoiding triggering a failure that you cannot control. And this is where the narrative changes completely. Hamilton's problem stops being his and becomes Ferrari's. Because it doesn't matter who is behind the wheel if the system can fail like this. The question is no longer why Hamilton lost power. The real question is how many more times can it happen again without warning.